I think you're on mute, and then we can get going. All right, we should be good now.
Okay,
Holy God.
good to go.
All right. All right, Coach. Coach David Cox, URI men's basketball coach. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, the biggest thing going on in our country right now is in the light of the George Floyd death, or murder, I should say, what has transpired around our country. And I wanted your initial reaction to when that happened last week, and then everything that's transpired over the weekend.
Oh wow, anger, frustration. I've witnessed this too many times, as has the rest of America. Obviously, I'm a black man. I'm 47 years old. I come from Washington D.C. I've come from struggles. I've seen struggles. But at the end of the day, we all were raised to believe that the police were there to protect and serve, and we've seen far too many situations. Recently because of video footage, uh, uh, um, similar to the George Floyd incident that we saw on footage the other day. So I'm extremely angry, but there's also a fearful side. Just being a black man, having a son, so there's some fear there as well. So there's a whole mixed bag of feelings, anxiety, fear, but the dominant feeling right now is anger. To be honest with
So you grew up in Washington D.C. Obviously, here in Rhode Island, we didn't see as much going on over the weekend as we saw in D.C. How hurtful was it for you to see everything that happened in that community that your parents still live in, and a lot of family and friends?
Well, I mean, again, just it's not just in D.C. It's in cities throughout the country, and what you're seeing here is, as I mentioned, frustration and an anger, coming from a group of people, specifically in this case, black people, who have had enough, who have truly had enough. Again, Yanni, this isn't new to this country.
Right.
This isn't new to this country. We were born here as slaves. There were rules and laws, that were put in place to make sure that we stayed almost subhuman. We've gone through decades and decades of protests, decades of sit-ins. We've had some dynamic, speakers, people who are able to articulate, from the black community how we've been feeling. We've had all that. We've had a black president. We've had a black president, and typically, what happens is, when we do try to make some noise about some of these things that are occurring, typically what happens is, we'll be asked, hey, aren't you satisfied with where you are right now as a group? You did just have a black president. The way we see it, you guys are now on equal footing, and in no area, in no area in this country are we on equal footing. And that's one issue. But the exact issue of police, as far as their interaction with African American young men in this country, is something that we should all be locked in on right now. And beyond that, Yanni, I think my biggest gripe or source of frustration and anger, comes from the fact that this has been happening for decades. We know that. More recently, it's been happening in plain view because of camera phones. Is there anything in particular about this George Floyd situation that was different than, I could just go down the list of names of individuals who were killed by police officers, choked, shot in the car, so on and so forth. So I keep saying to myself, what's new? Why such the insurrection now? It's just a way that, unfortunately, I and many people who look like me have had to feel on a daily basis. And all I can think of is that the pandemic, it's like a perfect storm. Everybody's home now and everybody's paying attention. So therefore, yesterday, we get 1,000 statements from people and so on and so forth. I've lived this. I've lived this all my entire life. I've spoken this quite often, particularly to parents and students, but also to other colleagues, about my plight and about the struggles of African American young men. Just trying to have a conversation, trying to get a deeper understanding. And my biggest fear is that once this pandemic is over, once it's lifted, you know, will those voices, will those statements be as strong? You know, will the urgency still be there? Will we all go about our own business days, back to work, you know, back to the restaurants, back shopping, back to the clubs? And then this issue continues. This is something obviously that Colin Kaepernick, you know, kneeled for, you know, several years ago, blackballed out of the NFL. And it's something that we have collectively as a community have been talking about for decades. 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now we're here in 2020, and we're dealing with the same thing. So yeah, there's an anger, there's a sense of urgency, a deep-rooted frustration, and a plea at the end of the day. I do want to say I'm thankful and grateful for all of those who did make statements, you know, particularly genuine statements, particularly, you know, white coaches who kind of stepped out of their comfort zone and did that. My plea though is that, you know, please continue to have that same energy, that same urgency, because this is something that we all live as Black people, specifically as Black men, every single day. Hey Yanni, I'm a pretty educated, you know, African American young man. I went to a very good high school. I was a National Honor Society member. I went to William & Mary. I've got a master's degree. I worked as a high school assistant principal for 10 years. Now I've been a college coach for 16 years. Been married to my wife for 20 years, and I have a beautiful family. With all that being said, I've been on the front of a hot hood of a police car or my car several times in my lifetime. Several. So never arrested, never issued a ticket or a warning. But I could tell you that I've been on that hood several times, and so have many of my friends and family members and people who look like me.
Are you comfortable sharing any times when you've been, obviously, like you just said, racially profiled or experienced blatant racism like that?
To be specific about it, I don't really want to get into specifics, but I'll just say this. You know, I can think of off the top of my head, you know, at least 5 or 6 incidents where I was racially profiled and pulled over. Okay. And let's just say I've been through probably about 10 of those incidents in my lifetime. Specifically, I can think of three times where I was pulled out of the car, you know, interrogated. The car was searched and nothing happened to me. One particular time in DC, I would say probably about 10 to 12 years ago, there was a Black and white cop who actually pulled behind me as I pulled off to the side of the road because I had dropped something. So I guess they thought it was suspicious activity. They pulled behind me, both got out. Black cop took me to the back of the car and started almost apologizing for what was about to transpire as the white cop went to the car, searched the car feverishly, looking for anything, came up with nothing. Said nothing to me prior to searching the car, nor anything to me after. Literally just walked by, got back in his car. Police allowed me, the Black police officer allowed me to get back in my car and head on while apologizing. I mean, that's just one, you know, that's just one of a number of incidents that I could possibly share with you. And again, this is real. This isn't, whoa, was me talk. This isn't, you know, feel bad for you know, for Black Man Day. You know, this is the plight of the Black man in this country, and I've endured it myself. And we collectively are obviously frustrated and very angry, and we're acting out in ways right now, specifically talking about the rioting, that are counterproductive. They're definitely counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish, to the communities, you know, that are involved in these riots and the looting. However, with that being, and I will not excuse that, but I will explain that it's just a culmination of years and years and years of frustration that's now built up to anger. And we must collectively do something about it, not just in this period now. I'm hoping and praying that it's not just because we're in a pandemic and things are still right now, and all of the focus is on TV, news, and social media that this is why we have this energy. I'm really hoping and praying that what I witnessed yesterday, I will see again another 2 weeks from now. I'll see again another month from now. I'll see again another year or two from now as we attack this problem and try to make real change.
Is it something you didn't have a practice with your team today in person, but that you've brought up with your team either yesterday or today in any of your virtual meetings?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We spoke about it on our last team meeting, and those guys will tell you they probably, there's probably a part of them that get a little bit tired of me jumping on my soapbox, but this is, obviously this is much more than coaching, much bigger than X's and O's. I'm intimately involved in the lives of young men, and I have an obligation and a responsibility, to teach them, to help them to grow, but also to help them to understand, exactly what the real world entails, because they have not probably encountered much of that up to this point in life. They've been, sheltered to a certain degree, some of them, not all. So no, we take it as an obligation as a staff to make sure that we have those conversations quite often.
As a head coach of a team that has prominence in the community, certainly at University of Rhode Island, do you feel, you mentioned all the statements coaches have been put out, sort of an obligation to take a lead in this conversation?
I'm sorry, what was that? Do I think that it was like an obligation?
No. Do you think, as the head coach of a prominent organization at URI, the men's basketball team, there is maybe not an obligation, but maybe that you guys in the sports community need to be at the forefront of this discussion we're all having, so it's out there and more people are talking about these things?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, this is that's what I said. That was the great part, I think, of yesterday, just going down my Twitter and seeing all of those coaches. I think the first one I read was Danny's, and I think I read, Chris Mack's, and I'm saying, okay, now we've got some great initial movement. Well, again, my hope is that today, that not those specific individuals, but those who made posts yesterday, and there were millions of them yesterday from all walks of life, that they still have that same energy today, that they're still upset today about it. I don't want yesterday to have been like a hashtag day or a checklist day, not at all. That's why, again, I have to ask myself, unfortunately, the question, is this real or not? Is this movement now starting to take shape? I certainly hope it is. I certainly hope it is. But I have seen now time and time and time again, specifically over the last 5 to 8 years, right, where we've watched these videos, it's been shocking, all in anger, right? And then 2 weeks later, there isn't the same energy. There is no movement. We haven't organized. We haven't mobilized. We haven't done any of those things. And then to put more salt in the wound, as we watch the proceedings play out with some of these officers who have been prosecuted and then not being charged. That's a devastating effect mentally on Black men. I can speak to that, personally. That's a devastating effect.
And just one or two more. Obviously, you mentioned your age, growing up in D.C. Do your players ever come to you and tell you of stories they've experienced, either at home or specifically on campus, where they've experienced overt racism or just anything subtle in their community that they wanted to talk to you about?
Yeah, absolutely, Donnie. Absolutely. I mean, again, I coach a team of 12 or 13 African-American men, from here in America, so yes, wherever they've come from, they've had to deal with it. Like, again, this isn't a new phenomenon.
Right.
It shouldn't be shocking all to everybody. It shouldn't be the fact that, oh my goodness, you have guys that actually, yes, I think that's what we're trying. That's the message we're trying. Yes. If you are a Black man in this country, you are going to have one, if not multiple interactions like that. The majority of us, so it happens, yes. And it's unfortunate.
And so
truly unfortunate.
The white members of your team, on your staff, the players, how do you educate them on maybe something they, of course, aren't experiencing that their teammates or the players on this team are.
Continuous dialogue. I mean, it's continuous dialogue. First of all, obviously, we've got a, a spectacular staff and a great mix of old, young, black and white. And speaking specifically of, the white members of the staff, first of all, their character is the reason why I hired them in the first place, outside of the basketball aspect. So all of them are great people. They know how to communicate. They know how to effectively interact with our population of young men. With that being said, they'll be the first to admit to you that they haven't had necessarily these personal experiences. They've been witness to them. They've had conversations they've heard, but they haven't had these, So there's empathy there, genuine empathy there as well. But I know for a fact that I have a staff full of guys, all of them who roll up their sleeves and stand shoulder to shoulder with all of our guys and fight or protest with them. But it's just a conversation. We have to continue to have these types of conversations where, I'm not throwing shots, where it's not being received as I'm throwing shots. This is just a conversation, or I'm not looking for sympathy or empathy necessarily. I'm looking for a degree of understanding. I just need you to understand my plight, my situation. That's all. That's what I need to happen first. And so those conversations need to continue to take place.
All right, really good stuff, Dave. I really appreciate your time and your perspective, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Yanni. Thanks for having me, partner.